Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are on this fast forward planet, which is wrapped in so many layers of turbulence. I've stopped enumerating them on this show called Sustain What. And you know the list, and it expands every day. One of the big ones is how we manage information in the world where so much of what's coming at us is either designed to distract or piss us off or pat us on the back or is completely fake or is and we have tools now, unparalleled tools to use the massive information humanity has assembled so far. And we're going to talk about some of this today in this conversation with Christopher Mims and with Melanie Mitchell. Melanie is at Santa Fe Institute, has had a long career digging in on artificial intelligence. She wrote a book about this in 2019. She has a great blog we'll explore on Substack. And my streaming thing to Substack for some reason isn't working, so I'll just post that later. But this is live streaming everywhere else. And Christopher has a new book that's kind of a user's guide to these technologies, these software designed things that we're all using, even if we don't think we're using them now. And all of this, partially, I've been on this sort of worry wagon myself. I signed on to one of those letters that went around about getting really clear about the uncertainties and where this could all lead on that high level scale. I still think that there's interesting issues there. And at the same time, the utility factor and how will it affect our jobs and our daily lives is something that's really important to explore. So first of all, congratulations on the book. I think it just launched like 2 days ago. Is that right?
Yeah, on Tuesday. It's been out just a few days, and it's been great to see people, start to dig in. Fingers crossed they like it. We'll see. But you described it accurately, right? It's a user's guide. It's as much about what the limitations of AI are as what its abilities are, which is why I was ecstatic that you got Melanie to come talk, because she has been just instrumental in my reporting, and I think does a great service through her public education. Right, Dr. Mitchell, your Substack, I love it, and I think you're kind of uniquely gifted in terms of talking to people about what are the base building blocks of today's transformer-based LLMs and other systems. And so, what can we reasonably expect from them, and what are their limitations?
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I really enjoyed your book. I wrote an endorsement for it. I think it's one of the rare places where you can actually find a realistic assessment of AI and what kinds of good things it can do for you and some of the bad things that it might end up doing.
Yeah. Well, so here we go. And I'm still reading the book, but I'm liking what I'm seeing so far, and I've been desperate for, and also in your columns in the Wall Street Journal, I should say, you've been a straight shooter in looking at these technologies that, I mean, this one's particularly tough because the breathlessness is not just like, climate change has its factions and interests around it, like fossil fuel interests and renewable energy campaigners. But the scope of money that's driving the AI conversation, along with the explosively rapid nature of the evolution of the tools, feels unique. Maybe Melanie, is it unique? I mean, do you look back in history at the printing press and other things too, in terms of whether this really is different? And then back to you, Christopher, too.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, it's sort of different in the speed at which the economy has, in a way, embraced it, at least in terms of funding for these big AI companies, and also how much money they're spending in creating these tools. It remains to be seen what the transformation of our society is going to be, if it's going to be as big as they predict. I'm a little skeptical of that, but it's certainly in terms of the amount of money going into these things, it's just crazy. And supposedly, if AI fails economically, that's going to take down the rest of the economy with it.
Yeah, and that gets us right back to Chris, to your work, especially at the Wall Street Journal. Talk about that a little bit. What I was just saying, this. So you have the explosive change in the technology, you have the hype around it, you have the money around it. How are we even supposed to grasp? Where do we set our barometer of worry and or opportunity with all that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think what Melanie just said is absolutely correct. I mean, if AI doesn't deliver on the promise that's implicit in the scale of investment going into it, the economy is very much in trouble. And I think this is what makes kind of handicapping, what is the near and long-term future of current generation AI so difficult, because the two things, its technical capabilities and the amount of money being poured into it, of course, are related. I do think that, there has been a lot of overstatement of what it's going to be capable of and when, and you see folks walking that back all the time. Dario, head of Anthropic at Davos, was just like, oh, maybe AGI is not going to arrive quite as soon as I thought it would. Every 6 months they like to say, 80% of coders are going to be completely replaced by this. And then you go and talk to the coders, and Melanie can speak to this. And they're like, no, really not quite yet. There is an element of sort of productivity theater with modern AI. It's really great at generating products that look like work, that look like what are supposed to be the output of a given job, but they're really not actually what you wanted. So there are some productivity
I got to pause
gains
you
here.
for a second. I love that term, productivity theater.
Yeah. Related term is work slop. We can get into that later, but the bottom line is that like when I step way back and I just look at this entire industry kind of with fuzzy eyes, my intuition is, one, these things are going to continue to do new and amazing things. They're going to increase in their capabilities in ways that are going to be really surprising and exciting if you're a technologist. Does that mean they're going to deliver on the level of investment going into them? As a part-time financial journalist, part-time technology journalist, I got to say, I don't believe that's the case at all. And I would say that, I'm not really saying anything that would surprise anybody when I say that, like, one of the things that many of us are doing at the Wall Street Journal right now is trying to document the scale of the investment bubble that's happening in AI right now, because when it pops, when the bottom falls out, I think it's going to be ugly, and I think there are going to be a lot of stranded assets, giant data centers that are only half full and maybe have to be shut down because they can't justify the expense of running them.
Boy, and there's a lot of books and a lot of scurrying around getting ahead of when that's going to happen, of course. But as with all bubbles, it seems it's really hard to say. It's kind of like a mega drought. You don't know you're in it until you're in it, like substantially.
Yeah, I think environmental metaphors really apply here because it's on that scale.
Yeah. So I've put up part of the table of contents just so we could kind of break down the key parts of the book. One of the big ones is it's for teams or organizations. It's for individuals. Right. I think a lot of my audience would be interested in the individual component. And maybe you could just talk briefly about that. Obviously, there's innumerable sectors of society and even in daily life where that comes up. But and you also have your 24 laws of AI. We're not going to go through them all. But maybe are there some basic principles the average person should be thinking about and at that scale?
Yeah, I mean, I think for individuals, the thing you got to understand, and this is, I would love for Melanie to speak to this because she has been kind of my North Star on this. These things are they're incredibly good at simulating intelligence, but if anything, they're this kind of incredible exercise in, well, what is intelligence really? Like, what does make us unique? Because we're sort of programmed by evolution. I think when we converse with something that can, speak fluently to us, we associate that with intelligence. But these things are great at, speaking fluently with us, but missing things that have to do with abstract reasoning and with long-term planning and with world models. And nothing that I have seen in the field suggests that we have figured those things out yet. And Melanie, I'd love for you to speak to that, because I think you're a very gifted communicator about how these operate, why they're probably more than what some people call just like spicy autocomplete or stochastic parrots, but certainly less than something that maybe deserves the term artificial intelligence. I'm just really curious, when people ask you, how you describe that.
Yeah, so the word intelligence, of course, is not it's not a generally well-defined term. I remember Marvin Minsky, who is one of the pioneers of AI, called it a pre-scientific term, and I think it still is. It's we have things like IQ tests and other psychometric instruments that purport to test intelligence, but what intelligence is not. It's kind of this umbrella term for a lot of different capabilities. And I think a while ago, Christopher wrote a really nice article about sort of just the term artificial intelligence, which was coined by John McCarthy in the 1950s to describe this field. Other people didn't like that term, and Herbert Simon, Nobel Prize economist, and Alan Newell proposed calling the field complex information processing. So imagine what the world would be like today if
computing.
Yeah, if we were all just doing complex information processing, and that's a lot less anthropomorphic than artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
So I think that's some sense, what you could call the original sin of the field. And I think Christopher has a chapter called The Original Sins of AI.
Right. Indeed.
Yeah, I love that framing.
So talk a little bit more about that, Christopher. Is there a way, maybe part of what we as individuals and organizations should do as the very first step is to really get our heads around a true definition of the difference between a tool and a capacity, or the tool and something similar to our own brains?
Yeah, I mean, so Ethan Mollick, professor at Wharton, who is very bullish on what AI can do, and I think sometimes he and I disagree in terms of like tone, but then when we get down to the particulars, we always agree on those. I mean, he also read and endorsed this book, and I think that might surprise people because his writings, I think, are very different than Melanie's in some ways. But I think he has this concept of the jagged frontier of the capabilities of AI. So in other words, we're still figuring out what it is that it's good for. But I think that it's very safe to say at this point that what it is great at is retrieving information, in a way that's more flexible than past search modalities and algorithms were. Sort of remixing that information in ways that are really useful. This is why it's been huge for coding. I mean, Linus Torvalds, the guy who created Linux, which underlies everything in our modern world. It's like sort of the core operating system of the modern world. Even he's kind of been claude-pilled and is getting into like vibe coding. I mean, to me, of course, it works great at coding because what you're asking it to do is to kind of search its memory and regurgitate and remix information, which it has seen, hundreds, thousands of times before. And, it can even do some amount of planning. But what these systems tend to be really bad at is when you ask them to do anything that is outside of their training data, they really start to break down. And I think that illustrates the way that a system which has memorized the entire internet and then some has such a vast knowledge that it is possible for it to simulate intelligence by regurgitating and remixing that information. But when you ask it to try to like truly transfer that learning to new tasks or to operate in a completely novel or unfamiliar environment, it really breaks down. You also see this, of course, with self-driving technology. And so to me, that's a good working model of why this is simulated intelligence. Like, it knows a million times more than any individual human, and it can pull on all of that knowledge. So it seems intelligent, but it can't be adaptable and reason at a level of abstraction that humans, most humans anyway, seem capable of. So I think we have to kind of go into every new task that we ask of it with that in mind, and recognize that the main way that we're going to get a big productivity boost from this in some fields is by putting tons of scaffolding and conventional software around it. And that's why it can code, but it's not so great at writing novels, for example.
Yeah, you also get at the different sectors, the using it in creative arenas. I deal with this as a musician. I'm starting to, and it's interesting. And my older son, works in special effects at one of the major movie studios, and he's instantly become their AI expert because they didn't have any. And he sees it very much as the grunt work reducer, so that you can get at the other stuff more clearly. Like, one of the things he does is he'll sift a screenplay for how much money they're going to have to spend on fake lions or whatever. and obviously, I think an AI tool can help identify those factors in a 100-page script really fast or whatever. But so he's not freaked out about it displacing the other parts of the work. And so is that one way to one of the big fears out there, and we almost had Brian Merchant on here as well, is the disruptive aspect of this for work. And you both, maybe you could both just weigh in on whether it's too early to even determine whether the costs to conventional employment will be outweighed in the long run by this burst of the liberation that comes to do better work through having better tools, or just through new fields emerging, that kind of thing. Is it too soon to make that judgment?
I think it's very uncertain. There's been predictions about AI taking over all jobs or most jobs ever since the 1960s. And I think people are often misunderstanding what a job might consist of. So here's an example. In 2016, Jeffrey Hinton, one of the most famous people in AI, predicted that by 2021, we wouldn't need any human radiologists anymore, because AI systems were getting so good at, interpreting X-rays or ultrasound images and so on in medicine. But he equated that the ability of AI systems doing well on sort of medical benchmarks. Okay, he found that pretty fast. He equated that ability with the ability to do the whole job of a radiologist. And I think that misunderstands what a job is not equal to a set of tasks. It's much more than that. It's dealing with all kinds of unexpected things that come up all the time in the real world. And this is one of the reasons why AI systems that have outperformed humans on, these benchmarks that big companies like to test their systems on, they outperform humans on the benchmarks, but then in the real world, it turns out they perform much worse. And this has to do with the notion of the jagged frontier, or jagged intelligence, as it's been called, of AI models, that they're really good in some situations, but if the situation they're in is something that's beyond or very different from what they've seen in the training data, they have trouble adapting to it. So I think that kind of mixing up of tasks and jobs is hurting the ability of people to predict the effect on jobs in general.
Yeah, and I would add one thing to that, because that's a really key insight. The other thing that I have learned in the process of writing this book, since writing this book, is that the assumption that because a system performs well on one of these benchmarks, that it is a like for like replacement for a human performing a particular task, that is a fatally flawed assumption, because as Melanie said, often these systems don't perform in the real world as they do on these benchmarks. No surprise, because we know they're just not as flexible as a human. More importantly, there is this subtlety about failure rates. So imagine you have a system and 80% of the time it does better than a human, okay? But 20% of the time it just completely crashes out and breaks. And the human has to step in and evaluate its work, clean up its mess, etc. In that scenario, depending on the job, the AI can lead to a situation where it takes the human as much time or more time to perform a task, to perform a set of tasks than it would have taken had they not used AI at all, right? Because they have to go in and clean up its messes. You see this a lot with coding, but you see this in other areas as well. Like when I use a deep research tool and I have to very carefully check everything that it is deriving from the sources that it's linking to, that's a lot of extra work in terms of basically fact checking its output, which at some point is greater than the amount of time it would have taken me to just like do a Google search and go read all of these sources on my own. You see this in a lot of different areas, and I don't think that businesses and even frontline workers understand yet the way that AI can be a drag on productivity when it fails above a certain rate. And obviously radiology or other, things where it's a life or death situation are a great example. Let's say that,
Right.
it's 95% effective, 5% of the time it gets it completely wrong and it misses a cancer. Well, as a radiologist, now, do you have to go back and redo all of its work because it's a life and death situation? So I think that it's not just that AI replaces tasks and not jobs. It's that it fails at those tasks in a way that a human wouldn't necessarily, and which can lead to actually a drop in productivity.
So that's a double bind there, because the expectation of management is higher productivity. My brother's a cardiologist. He's just gotten back into doing active cardiology, and the workload. I think there's an expectation of how many patients he can handle is now risen because of these tools. So you have this tension, as you were just describing, of those low probability but catastrophic failures and the expectation of more productivity. And that goes, I'm sure, way beyond medicine.
Yeah, and on the flip side, though, and this is where we get back to another aspect of the jagged frontier, in areas where the consequences of occasional failure are lower, it really can boost productivity. So,
Sure.
one example is lots of doctors love now to use AI-based systems to record patient encounters and then automatically generate notes and summaries from that, and help them fill out the sort of mountain of paperwork that they would normally have to do. There, I think it's great because it's a situation where it can do 80% of the drudge work. You can scan through it and very quickly clean up the parts that it missed. And suddenly it is just a data entry assistant for you, where it really can boost productivity.
Yeah. Melanie, back to you. I want to back off a little bit and back into the arena of expectations. As I just said, management, I think has artificial expectations. You've written a lot about the aspects of this that get our attention and get media coverage. And for example, you did a piece, my colleague and friend, Tom Friedman, who likes to jump on the latest technology, wrote this piece that says China and the US should collaborate on scoping out the risks from this technology. And you push back pretty constructively in your column. So in that, are you working, what's needed to ground that level of folks in some of these realities, the distinguishing realities of where it's productive, where it's dangerous, and the like?
Well, there's different narratives about what these systems are. One narrative is that they are super intelligent agents, kind of like us. And in that narrative, we can let them make consequential decisions. We can have them as our like our PhD level interns. That's one framing that Sam Altman gave of new ChatGPT. We can have them as our therapists and even as love interests. So that's a framing that people have used. But another framing, there's many different possible framings, is that they are tools. They're not creatures, they're tools. They are fallible tools, but very useful in some ways. And I think that's what I like so much about Christopher's book, is that he presents them very much as tools. And that they are, in the words of Arvind Narayanan, who's a Princeton scholar of AI, and his collaborator, Sayesh Kapoor, they are normal technologies, which is kind of going against the sort of disruptive, transformational idea, super intelligent idea. But the idea there is that they are like the internet, like the World Wide Web, maybe like social media, that they are technologies that are going to be integrated in our world, but at a much slower pace than maybe some of the big boosters have said. And that our expectations have to be measured by these kinds of technologies that have happened in the past, maybe even like smartphones or something like that, that we shouldn't treat them as this incredibly kind of magical super intelligence. And I think that's what Tom Friedman was kind of getting at in his article, that, oh my God, the world has completely changed. And say, no, this is actually, we've seen something like this before. And we know that these things take a lot of time to integrate into the world and into our, economy. And we shouldn't just expect overnight transformations. And people are going to be very disappointed if they do.
One thing that you're bringing to mind is that I think in the average person's field of vision, there has been almost an instantaneous transformation, meaning Google searches. The first results are AI generated. All the slop that we're seeing on social media, which we'll talk about in a minute. So we have this impression of explosive change because that's where it's showing up first. Does that resonate? Maybe Chris?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly have an impression of explosive change, and you can talk to ChatGPT, and it's just astounding, what it can do with language. But I guess the question about what's the effect on jobs, what's the effect on society, what's the effect on, the average person, and the expectations maybe for managers, that's a little different than this explosive change of, okay, we have these AI systems. But the question now is like, how do we use them to increase productivity, to actually be beneficial, to impact the economy? That's going to take longer than a lot of people might expect.
Right. So we're going to go to some questions. There's some that have already shown up, and I posted a QR code if anyone wants to maybe even join us in the studio. I have an instant banishment thing. So here, let's see. I just saw a good one. Yeah, Yvonne Alzupo, who's a frequent voice here, says there are good reasons why we need careful defined legislation and detailed regulation in AI. Uses for good, not the bad. Expect the unexpected. And Yvonne goes on to, here's the question. I heard that the Trump administration is interested in a new plan to use AI in Medicare benefit applications. Healthcare companies want to use AI instead of humans, doctors, to approve or deny treatments or procedures. So where does regulation come in here? We've already seen the utter failure of regulation to social media for so long. Now there's some talk about that. But what about this? Maybe
Yeah,
Chris.
I mean, on the one hand, it's easy to be cynical and say, well, under the current administration, we're getting the opposite of regulation. Part of this is that there has been this incredibly intense lobbying effort. I mean, one of the co-founders of OpenAI, Brockman, donated I forget what the figure is, and I don't want to get it wrong, but it's tens of millions to a fund that is devoted entirely to making sure that states cannot pass their own AI regulations. Right? They want only federal regulations, which of course are going to be a lot lighter. The argument there is, we're in a race with China and the rest of the world, so we can't be holding back our sort of AI champions. That said, I think it's important to have this discussion to lay the groundwork for a time when we might be able to get more thoughtful regulation of AI, because it's a general purpose technology, right? So, same way that, automobiles or firearms are general purpose technologies, and we have regulations all over America in all 50 states and every country on earth governing how you can operate an automobile or own a gun. I think it should be similar for AI. I mean, a very straightforward example is Grok, which is integrated into X, the social network, and has been used in all kinds of, truly horrific ways to abuse women and children on that site. And you have countries all over the world kind of stroking their chins and saying, well, should we ban this? You have payment processors who normally would instantly cut off any app or service that did this kind of thing, who hesitate to with X, because of the sort of political clout and the bully pulpit that Elon Musk in particular has. So clearly there are a lot of areas, low-hanging fruit, where there should be regulation. And, using this to reject or accept, claims for healthcare, I mean, that's kind of frightening. Obviously, a lot of those companies are already doing that, right? And we do need better regulation about transparency about that, and about auditing those algorithms so that we know exactly, how they're biased and what their outcomes are.
That's fair enough. I don't know if you're dug in much on the sort of externalities, but there was a question about the data center politics and realities, the environmental and energy suck up that's happening. Is part of that going to resolve when the bubble bursts? This year's Rebecca Green Carnegie is asking about electricity costs and the water and energy costs.
I mean, Melanie, I feel like you know more about where this could be going just in terms of the architecture and the rest. I mean, do you see this demand sort of expanding endlessly because of the kind of underlying demands of the algorithms?
I think for the near-term future, yes. And the goals of a lot of these big companies is to get more and more access to electricity. Microsoft wanted to take over 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant to power their AI systems. And these things do need incredible amounts of electricity. I don't know, there's been some debate about how much water they need. I think there's very little transparency from big companies on these kinds of energy uses. But the trend in general in computing has been to get smaller and smaller and more efficient. And that's been a big area of research in AI, in China, where they don't have access to the chips that are needed for AI as much as in the US. In China, they've done a lot of work and progress on making these things more energy efficient, making them smaller. And I think that trend is going to be the longer term future. And eventually, I think, I can't run something like ChatGPT on any computer that I have or I have access to, even if I, go to my friends at the nearby national laboratories. They can't run it either. It has to run on this enormous distributed set of chips at data centers. But I think eventually these smaller models are going to become much more common, and we will be able to run them ourselves. So it's going to take a while, but the trend is towards energy efficiency and making these giant networks smaller.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that's another reason we could have some stranded assets in terms of data centers. I mean, on the one hand, they keep coming up with new applications like video generation, which just demand more and more compute and more tokens. But on the other hand, for a lot of the everyday applications of AI, which I write about in the book, I do think we're going to be running these models locally. Eventually, it'll just run on your phone or whatever. And the efficiency drive there is very straightforward. It's economics, right? I mean, if every time you do a search on Google and it automatically generates a summary at the top, Google loses money on that, where in the past they would have been making money just because they're having to spend too much on electricity. Clearly, they're going to figure it out, right? These companies are great at efficiency. Even if they can't make the big leaps in capability that they've promised, like, they will figure out the efficiency side.
Yeah. And there's also, oh gosh, what's his name? I should look at it. I should Google it. No. Terran Norris is an energy guy, and he said there's already a lot more plasticity just in running the data centers to manage the load, so it'll match with the daily fluctuations in load for other things. There's uses of AI that have to be instantaneous, and there are other things that are not like that. So the plasticity that's there in these systems, I think, is something people miss. Not just this one. One thing that came to mind when we were talking about perceptions of intelligence, back in 2001, I wrote an article about climate models, where I interviewed the guy who ended up getting a Nobel Prize for climate modeling, Suki Manabe at Princeton. And he was saying he was getting worried at that point about climate modeling because people were adding more dimensions to it. And he said it's the difference between qualitative and quantitative results. He said basically we're building models that look like the Earth. They kind of behave in a cool way. These three multidimensional Earth, water, circulation models, but they're not the Earth. And I don't know whether that resonates, but it came to mind when you were talking about that. We're seduced by things that look like us.
Yeah, it's funny. You reminded me of a core application of AI these days, which Melanie knows more about than I do, which is translating physical models into AI-based or transformer-based ones that are more accurate, like with weather models. But maybe we can stick a pin in that. I do wonder about this simulation of intelligence and whether we're just kind of moving the goalposts on the so-called Turing test. But Melanie, I'm really curious what you think about what level of simulated intelligence is good enough for certain applications. For example, we already see people relating to chatbots, right? And I guess falling in love with them. I mean, I just read an incredible article in the New York Times about the rise of AI boyfriends in China. And so I do wonder, Melanie, do you think about, what is the level at which it can fool us or satisfy our desire for something intelligent to talk with, and it doesn't matter if it's truly intelligent? And what areas you anticipate that happening in?
Yeah, I mean, in some sense, a lot of people are very happy with their AI boyfriend or girlfriend, but we've seen that in some cases that can really go off the rails, and people can become, psychotic or lose touch with reality, or put too much trust in their AI companion and then be burned. And this isn't, AI in as companions, as in using them in mental health contexts is really tricky. So the simulation of intelligence goes a long way. I can talk to my chatbot and it sure seems smart, but then suddenly in some cases there will be a catastrophic failure, where it will help me commit suicide, or it will give me incredibly wrong medical advice, or it just doesn't have the connection to reality that is needed for a trustworthy companion. So I don't know how far we have to go in terms of quote unquote simulation of intelligence. That's a really hard question. And there's a big philosophical debate in the AI community about what it's going to take. Is it just scaling up these systems, scaling up the data they're trained on? Or is there something really fundamentally missing that has to do with engagement in the real world as opposed to the world of, this massive brain in a vat that's not actually intervening on the world in any way?
Yeah, I'm curious what you think of. I mean, there's all these. You have, Jan LeCun, who used to be chief scientist in charge of AI, I guess, at Meta. Fei-Fei Li, one of the so-called godmothers of AI, and a number of others who have said, well, I have a different idea about what comes next. Like, we're going to do so-called world models. We're going to do embodied intelligence. These AIs need to be learning more from the real world. Language does not equal thinking, or you can't get intelligence solely from even multimodal models, which can perceive things like images. What do you make of this? I mean, I guess it's in the nature of scientific inquiry. You just got to try and see. But are you optimistic about some of these things and the way that they could be combined with existing systems, or are we still kind of just like stumbling around in the dark?
I mean, there's a little bit of both, I guess. That we don't understand our own intelligence very well. We're quite far from understanding how our brains work, and it's a hard question how to make machines be intelligent. It's always been a harder question than people thought, in my opinion. So I endorse all these alternative investigations into how we can improve these systems, make them more kind of engaged in reality, understanding the world better. But I think there's different scientific push for different scientific progress, but there's also the commercial kind of pressure to have a product that makes money. And that's really affecting how AI is investigated, how people are trying to push the field forward. And that's always been a kind of a tension in the field. Are we studying intelligence, or are we making products? And nowadays, I think the making products is much stronger in this whole balance of things. And so it's hard to actually do something different from what people are currently doing they see as being successful.
But can that focus on products eventually lead to the capacity to do the wider, bigger stuff? I mean, let me explain my thinking. You're actually reminding me of the AI energy demand thing, where I've written a lot about energy and nuclear. They're investing in small modular reactors, and that investment wouldn't be there without that demand from these venture capitalists who are driving this stuff. And that may actually then accelerate the capacity for that technology to move forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's possible. But I think a lot of the commercialization has very short-term incentives, whereas the science is much more long-term, and that's, I think, hurt the field.
Could you say more about how you think it's hurt the field? I mean, is it just about distorting priorities? I mean, I've also been hearing, it's hard to get people to finish their PhDs because they can just go make $1 million a year working for a so-called frontier AI lab.
Absolutely. And it's also, the kind of very fundamental science that we need, which might, get neuroscientists talking to AI people. And that takes time. And even in the academic world of AI, it goes by very fast. You have to publish your papers. The field is moving quite fast. You have to publish your papers now rather than spending 5 years thinking about the nature of intelligence. And there's just not a very strong incentive to do slower science that really thinks deeply about these issues.
That challenge is all around us, even outside this field, I think. Oh gosh.
Yeah, I mean, Andy, one thing I would say, and I think you might appreciate this and your audience might appreciate this, the difference.
Oh, sure. Oh. Hold on a second, Chris. Something happened.
Energy is that, in energy, there's so many technologies that are pretty great where it's a matter of how do we scale this up? How do we refine this, right? How do we make more efficient wind turbines? How do we make more efficient, solar panels? And as you know, a lot of the development of these things happen because of just decades and decades of intense research, very patient capital, governments, national labs developing a lot of the underlying technology before it was commercialized. And, AI is completely different. I mean, ChatGPT was kind of an accident. I mean, the underlying transformer architecture was invented at Google. They didn't really recognize its potential. Somebody at OpenAI was like, what if we just keep cramming more data into it? And then they kind of accidentally discovered scaling laws. And then Sam Altman started tweeting cryptically about, we've created something so powerful that we're afraid to release it. That was ChatGPT 2 he was talking about. So, it's not the same equation. Like, I don't think pouring more and more money into commercial AI development is going to lead to the kind of breakthroughs that we need, because to get there, you have to take a winding path. And I think there's no better example than how we came up with the systems that, won folks like Geoffrey Hinton the Nobel Prize. I mean, he was toiling in utter obscurity, right? I mean, Melanie, I think your career kind of roughly matches up with his, and you can speak to this, but so far as I know, people were rejecting his papers and saying, what is this fool's errand that you're on? And he just kept at it for decades. And I just don't think that kind of toiling on things that you believe in, that you could be wrong about, is an option when you are getting, $10 million a year in stock options and the pressure is to deliver next quarter.
Yeah. I think that is exactly what's happening.
Wow. So let's go back into the book, and we should do more. I should do a whole track on this.
Sorry, Andy. Did you ask a question? I think I just lost your audio.
Oh, can you hear me or not? You can't hear me?
No. Oh, hold on.
Oh, that's weird.
I can hear you.
Chris, something happened on your end. There was a point when I lost your audio too. Yeah, hold on. Let's see. Here we are in the technological, we're in the technosphere.
Oh, there we go. I'm back. I don't know what it was.
Yeah, no, it was fun. Actually, at the beginning of your answer, we couldn't hear you for a second too. But here we are.
Oh, okay.
Now here we are in the technology.
Yep.
Yes, and at the end of this, I think StreamYard has it automatically generates like quotable, clippable parts of this discussion we're having, which has been helpful for me. So no, I was saying I want to get back into the book and in the personal stuff. The section on creativity. Could you just talk about a little bit about that before we start to head toward a close? I don't know whether you both have a hard out at the top of the hour, but
yeah, I do.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing about creativity is, AI, the sort of law of AI there is like, AI cannot be creative on your behalf, right? But it can assist your creativity. It's funny. I wouldn't endorse the Joe Rogan podcast, but Ben Affleck was pretty good on this.
I watched that. Yeah.
Yeah. And he's like, look, it can't write a scene for you in a movie. But let's say you need a particular plot device. You're like, oh, somebody has to send a message, but it gets delayed for 2 days for some reason. You can just go in and kind of type your request, and it's like, oh, well, here are some ways that you might be able to make that play out in your movie. So lots of people use it for, in Hollywood, they'll use it for concept art. People will use it to kind of brainstorm. And in some ways, what it's doing is it's holding up a funhouse mirror to you, right? So if you want to get really weird and you want to make it part of your kind of writer's room or whatever, you can do that. If you want to, sometimes it's funny when I'm brainstorming with my editors and we need to come up with like an illustration for one of my columns, I'll be struggling to get across what it is I envision. And then I'll just go into Gemini, Google's Nano Banana image generation thing, and I will just give it a pretty elaborate prompt and tell it the style of the kind of editorial cartoon I want it to create. And then I can just show it to my editors. And it's not in any way replacing the human beings who will illustrate my latest piece, but it just helps me communicate with them. I mean, a classic example is lots of people will use Nano Banana now to like make the visuals for their slides, right? So these are all, when they have to give a presentation internally, these are all ways that it can kind of be a partner, can assist with your creativity, can help you when you're stuck. But, definitely you're not going to use it to create a finished product unless you want your more sophisticated consumers to instantly recognize that it's AI and label it AI slop. And as many surveys reveal, once people think that AI was involved in the creation of something creative, they tend to get really upset and reject it.
By the way, Srinivasan has just posted here saying hello, Chris.
Hey.
He can't wait to read your book. And he says, and he's also nice to know Melanie's important work. So we're spreading the gospel here, and Sri can help spread it as well.
Yeah, Melanie, can you say aloud the name of your Substack? Because I really think it should just be on everybody's reading list.
Oh, thank you. It's called
AI Guide.
A Guide for Thinking Humans, and it's aiguide.substack.com.
Yeah, I just put the link up there
Thank you.
again. I just posted it earlier.
And I gotta say, I love that you post on your own schedule. Like, I never feel like you're like, what am I gonna write this week? Like, when you send something, I'm like, this was the thing that Melanie was like, I am ready to talk about this.
Yeah, it's hard to have a day job and do a blog.
Yeah, but it means it's much higher signal to noise, I think, from your Substack.
No, that's great. And I think you mentioned Fei Li. Is that right? Earlier? Is this? I see she's on Substack too, and I didn't know that until this very second. So, that idea of getting beyond just words and images, as far as what it's learning from, seems really important to me. So thanks.
Yeah, that whole concept is world models, and there's a ton of work that's happening at DeepMind. They have a world model generator called Genie. Fei Li's startup is all about this.
Interesting.
It seems like that's going to be part of what Jan LeCun's going to do. I don't know.
Center of Jan LeCun's startup is world models. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Has he tried to recruit you yet?
No.
This is so interesting. I also wanted to, and the idea of jobs and stuff. I think it was only 6 months ago. I'm kind of a newbie in some of this. I think the phrase prompt engineer came to me first, like 6 months ago. and now I just went on LinkedIn to put it into the jobs index. And of course, there's all these prompt engineer. It's a whole new thing. As a journalist, I used to feel really I was really good at Googling. I mean, I can Google to get a specific detail of something back in the day, probably better than anyone I knew. But now you have this idea, and I think, Chris, in your book, thinking about the utility aspect here, one of the things is just being precise about what you're trying to do. Does that make sense? Not just at the level of a prompt engineer, but how do you put this stuff to work?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is that, these systems advantage folks who are good writers and clear communicators in a way that previous technologies didn't, right? Like before, if you wanted to describe a piece of software that you wanted a computer to make, you had to have spent years and years, learning the syntax and the ins and outs of a particular computing language. Now you can do it in plain English, and lots of very experienced coders are, right? And then going back and cleaning up the code afterward. But similarly, if you have a very specific request, like you don't have to be good at Googling anymore. You can just give a deep research tool a very detailed prompt and then keep iterating with it and keep sort of pushing it deeper into its search index to find the information that you want. So it's funny. I think some of the people who are the quickest to reject these tools actually would be the best at using them if they gave it a shot. But I can see why they're annoyed and pissed off, because, you know, one thing we haven't even had the time to get into is like the ethics of all of this, and the fact that,
Yeah.
you know, as people, more and more news reports reveal, like there is so much human effort which went into training these models, and folks are not compensated for that, you know?
No, I'm involved with that lawsuit. I was just trying to figure out whether to stay in the settlement or not, but that's a whole nother.
Oh, the Anthropic settlement.
Yeah,
So one
yeah.
of your books was used to train the Anthropic's.
Yes.
There you go.
So now, I'm going to close out with something very brief here. As a musician, you know, I have all kinds of acoustic instruments. I play mostly folk. I play mostly with other people. But some of my songs I felt I wanted to experiment with Suno, you know, as a way to kind of, what would it be like to do a production? And I think it's got an equalizing capacity for people. You know, all the focus is on Spotify and now lists of country hits, but for the average person or just a musician like me, it's a way to test drive stuff that's really cool. So here, I'm just going to show you briefly. I think you'll be able to hear this. We all hold a dream somewhere deep in our minds where everything's fair and everyone's kind. So this is basically a protest song. It's about where we are right now. It's about save dreams for sleeping. It's time to get real. And, you know, I don't have time to turn it into an album, or whatever, and hire musicians. I don't have the money, although I do want to work with real musicians. So I just did this on Suno a few days ago.
We all hold a dream somewhere deep in our minds where everything's fair and everyone's kind. Flowers all bloom and no smoke in the skies. No wars in the headlines, no tears in your eyes. But save dreams for sleeping, it's time to get real. Hard workers are suffering while billionaires steal. Young women in trouble can't find caring hands. House builders born elsewhere get bundled in vans. I'm not saying it's easy, all good things take time. Those trying to divide us are good at their crime. But if we stop dreaming, dive into the fray, a more perfect union is coming our way.
So, I mean, all the imagery is mine. Those are videos I shot, but you know, that took about 30 seconds for it to generate that. And to me, and I have a friend who's a retired environmental lawyer who's using Suno just to turn his own words into music. And so it feels good to me. That's why, you know, the idea of the book, having, you know, getting real about what's possible with these technologies, feels valuable. And so I hope everyone out there checks out How to AI. You can find Chris Mims, MIMS. It's a nice, easy name to Google for, and the title of the book to learn more about it. And absolutely track Melanie's blog, Melanie on Substack, where I am as well. There's her URL. Any last quick words, Melanie, and then Chris?
Great song. Yeah, I think now I've seen so many of these kind of AI assisted protest songs online, which I think is a, you know, good use of the technology.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's used on the other end of things too, and
yeah, for sure.
Always a battle.
It's a double-edged sword.
No, and Chris, any last words of wisdom?
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it just now, Andy, which is like, it's a general purpose technology, right? Everybody gets to use it. The Department of Homeland Security can use it to, you know, generate kind of fascist coded AI slap, and you can use it to create a protest song, and, you know, folks can use it to target weapons, and it can also be used to defend against, you know, government incursions on everyone's rights. So that's why I wrote the book. I mean, this is a technology that's here, so it's up to us to decide how to use it. And I hope more people of good conscience will use it for their own ends and not just leave it to giant companies with the resources to leverage it, and to those who might not agree with you to use it.
Great. Well, thanks both of you for being here today on Sustain What. We can revisit these issues and go deeper on other aspects of it down the line. And folks, just go to that distracting scrolling bar at the bottom for information on how to read the piece that I wrote about this. I'm going to do another post right after we're done with the final version. And onward we go into the information environment, navigating and using whatever tools we have to make the best of it. Thanks again.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, hold on one second.